"You're resisting." "Stop resisting," the young officer yelled, his voice tight with adrenaline, even as Art Pendleton, 74, a decorated Marine veteran with a noticeable limp, lay dazed on the grimy pavement behind the diner, the acrid smell of ozone sharp in his nostrils. The officer had just tased him for loitering and failing to comply, when Art had simply been trying to explain he was waiting for the diner to open for their early bird veterans' breakfast. Before Art could fully process the searing pain or the injustice, a low, earth-shaking rumble began to permeate the pre-dawn quiet. It grew louder, closer. 6 minutes later, the narrow alley was completely blocked, not by another police cruiser, but by the improbable, awe-inspiring, and utterly terrifying sight of an M1 Abrams main battle tank, its massive cannon slowly traversing its turret, light sweeping the scene. If you believe no one who served should face such brutality for seeking a quiet meal, type Sirfi below and demand respect. Arthur. Art Pendleton was a man etched by time and conflict. His 74 years sat heavily on a frame that had once been ramrod straight, a testament to decades in the United States Marine Corps. He'd seen action in places whose names were now faded lines in history books, from the sweltering jungles of Southeast Asia to the arid deserts of the Middle East. His limp, a constant companion, was a souvenir from a poorly parachuted landing during a night operation decades ago. The slight tremor in his hands, a reminder of countless hours spent handling heavy weaponry under extreme duress. He lived a Spartan life in a small, government-subsidized apartment for seniors, his Marine pension just enough to cover rent and essentials. His greatest joys were simple: a well-brewed cup of coffee, a good history book, and the weekly camaraderie of the early bird breakfast club at Rosie's Diner, a gathering of fellow old soldiers, sailors, and airmen who met every Tuesday at 5:00 a.m. to swap stories and share a few laughs before the city fully awoke. Rosie, the diner's owner, a kind woman whose own father had served, always had a fresh pot brewing and a warm welcome for her boys, as she called them. Art usually arrived earliest, around 4:30 a.m., to sit on the old wooden bench behind the diner near the warm exhaust vent from the kitchen, enjoying the pre-dawn quiet, watching the city slowly stir to life. He'd read his paper or just sit with his thoughts, waiting for Rosie to unlock the back door and let him in to help set up the coffee. He never caused trouble, never asked for anything. He was just Art, a quiet fixture in the diner's early morning rhythm. This particular Tuesday morning, the air was unusually crisp, carrying the first real bite of approaching winter. Art, bundled in his old Marine issue field jacket, its insignia long since removed, but its familiar weight a comfort, sat on his usual bench, his worn duffel bag containing his newspaper and a thermos of weak tea beside him. He was dozing lightly, lulled by the hum of the diner's generators, when he was rudely jolted awake. "Hey, you! On your feet! What are you doing back here?" The voice was young, sharp, and laced with an aggressive authority that immediately put Art on edge. He blinked, disoriented, trying to focus in the dim pre-dawn light. 2 police officers stood before him, their flashlights blinding him. One was older, Officer Miller, his expression weary but watchful. The other, Officer Davies, was young, barely out of the academy, with a chest puffed out and an eagerness to assert his newfound power that was almost palpable. "Just waiting for the diner to open, officer," Art explained, his voice raspy from sleep. "Rosie lets me in early on Tuesdays for the veterans' breakfast." Officer Davies scoffed. "Veterans' breakfast? Sure. Looks more like you're casing the joint or just another vagrant looking for a handout. This is private property. You're trespassing." "I'm not trespassing," Art insisted, trying to remain calm. "Rosie knows I sit here. I've been doing it for years." He fumbled in his pocket for his VA ID card, a standard procedure he'd learned to offer quickly when dealing with law enforcement. "See? Arthur Pendleton, Sergeant Major, retired." Davies barely glanced at the card. Means nothing to me, old man. Lots of guys carry those. Doesn't give you the right to camp out behind businesses. He took a step closer, his hand drifting toward the taser on his belt. I want you up and out of here now, or you're going to have a real problem. Officer Miller, the older partner, finally spoke, his voice tired. Davies, ease up. Let's just see his ID properly. Run it. He's an old guy, probably harmless. But Davies was already on a power trip. Harmless? He's non-compliant, Sarge. He's arguing. I gave him a lawful order to disperse. He unclipped his taser. Art felt a cold dread. He recognized this escalation, this eagerness for confrontation from a young officer trying to prove himself. He'd seen it countless times in far more dangerous places. Son, Art said, his voice low but firm, trying to inject a note of reason. There's no need for that. I'm not resisting. I'm just explaining. I will leave if you insist, but I'm telling you, Rosie expects me. I don't care what Rosie expects, Davies shouted, his face flushed. I care what I expect, and I expect compliance. You're still arguing. You're still resisting. He raised the taser, the red laser dot dancing on Art's chest. Last chance? Move, or you get the juice. Before Art could even attempt to rise from the low bench, a movement that was already slow and painful for him, before Officer Miller could physically intervene or verbally de-escalate his partner, Davies fired the taser. The barb struck Art squarely in the chest. Even through the thick field jacket, an excruciating, blinding bolt of electricity seared through Art's body. He cried out, a strangled gasp, as every muscle locked, spasmed. He pitched forward off the bench, crashing heavily onto the grimy asphalt, his head striking the pavement with a sickening thud. He lay there convulsing, the world a chaotic blur of pain, flashing lights, and the acrid smell of burnt ozone. He could hear Davies shouting triumphantly, "Subject down! Subject compliant!" He felt rough hands flipping him over, yanking his arms behind his back, the cold steel of handcuffs biting into his wrists. Officer Miller was kneeling beside him, his face a mixture of shock and dismay. Davies, what the hell did you do? He's an old man. He wasn't resisting. He failed to comply with a lawful order, Sarge, Davies retorted, though his voice now held a tremor of uncertainty as he looked down at the frail, elderly man twitching on the ground. He was being belligerent. Art, who had just wanted a cup of coffee and some camaraderie. As the overwhelming pain began to recede, replaced by a profound, sickening weakness and a burning humiliation, Art focused on a single, desperate thought. He had to make the call. He was vaguely aware of Miller speaking into his radio, requesting a supervisor and an ambulance, his voice tight with controlled anger directed at his partner, while Davies was preening, perhaps replaying his takedown for the body cam. He clearly wasn't concerned about Art. With immense effort, Art managed to slide one trembling hand into his jacket pocket. His fingers, clumsy and unresponsive, fumbled for the small, familiar object. It wasn't a phone. It was a battered old Zippo lighter, one he hadn't used for smoking in decades, but always carried. Engraved on its side was a barely visible unit crest, a very specific, very unofficial one, and a single, unlisted emergency number. It was a relic from his time in a highly classified Marine Force reconnaissance unit, a bat phone to a network that prided itself on looking after its own. No matter how long ago they'd served, he managed to flip it open and, shielding the tiny flame with his cuffed hands, ignite it once, twice, 3 times. A prearranged nonverbal distress signal, for extreme duress, used only when voice communication was impossible or compromised. He then let it fall, hoping against hope that the protocol was still active, that someone, somewhere, was still watching the old channels. 6 minutes. The world can change in 6 minutes. Officer Miller was trying to get Art to sit up, offering him water, clearly appalled by Davies' actions. Davies was arrogantly defending himself, insisting he'd followed procedure for a non-compliant, potentially dangerous subject. The ambulance was still en route. The police supervisor was still a few minutes out. The pre-dawn calm of the alley was shattered by their argument and Art's pained groans. Then the ground began to tremble, not a subtle vibration, but a deep, resonant, bone-jarring shudder that vibrated up through the asphalt, rattling the trash cans, making the diners. Windows hum. Both officers froze, looking around wildly. "What in God's name is that?" Miller whispered, his eyes wide. The rumbling grew louder, closer, accompanied now by the unmistakable clanking metallic shriek of heavy treads on pavement. It was a sound utterly alien to this quiet urban street. From the main road at the end of the alley, a monstrous shape began to emerge, silhouetted against the first faint gray light of dawn. It was low, wide, brutally angular, and undeniably, terrifyingly military, an M1A2 Abrams main battle tank. Its desert camouflage paint scheme looked utterly surreal in the urban setting, its massive 120mm cannon slowly, deliberately, traversing to cover the alley entrance. It didn't just block the alley, it consumed it. The tank ground to a halt, its turbine engine winding down to a deep, menacing idle that still shook the very air. Its turret-mounted machine gun swiveled slightly, its dark eye seeming to fix directly on Officer Davies. Simultaneously, from the other end of the alley, two heavily armored Humvees, also in desert camo, roared into position, effectively sealing the alley into a kill box. Marines in full combat gear, M4s held at the low ready, disembarked with silent, lethal precision, establishing a perimeter. Their movements a blur of disciplined threat. The red and blue flashing lights of the approaching police supervisor's car were suddenly comically insignificant. Officer Davies looked like he had seen a ghost, or perhaps something far worse. His face was chalk white, his jaw slack, his earlier bravado completely gone. Officer Miller simply stared speechless at the impossible scene unfolding before him. The top hatch of the Abrams tank hissed open, and a figure emerged, silhouetted, against the dawning sky. He wore the helmet and communications gear of a tank commander. But as he climbed out and dropped lightly to the ground, it was clear he was an officer of significant rank, a Marine Corps colonel. He strode toward the two stunned police officers, his boots crunching on the asphalt, his expression unreadable, but radiating an aura of absolute, non-negotiable authority. "Officers," the colonel's voice was calm, almost conversational, but it cut through the tension like a diamond drill. "I am Colonel Marcus Thorne, United States Marine Corps. This area is now under temporary military control due to a credible threat against a protected military asset. You will holster your weapons, place your hands on your heads, and await further instructions." "Protected military asset?" Miller stammered, gesturing toward Art, who was now being gently assisted by two Marine medics who had appeared as if from nowhere. "You mean him?" Colonel Thorne's gaze flickered to Art, a flicker of something, recognition, profound respect, then back to the officers. "Sergeant Major Arthur Pendleton," Thorne stated, his voice like granite, "is not just a veteran. He is a legend within certain highly specialized units of the United States Marine Corps. His service, though largely unacknowledged publicly, was of critical importance to national security for over 3 decades. He is, for lack of a better term you might understand, a national treasure." He paused, his eyes narrowing, fixing on Officer Davies. "And it appears, son, that you have just assaulted a national treasure with a less lethal weapon. That is problematic." Davies opened his mouth, then closed it again, seemingly unable to form words. The police supervisor finally arrived, siren off, taking in the scene with wide, horrified eyes. His alley, his officers, surrounded by a Marine tank and a platoon of combat-ready Marines. Colonel Thorne turned to him. "Captain, I presume? Your officers have made a grave error. Sergeant Major Pendleton was unarmed, posed no threat, and was in fact waiting for a pre-arranged community breakfast with fellow veterans. He was subjected to an unprovoked assault by your officer Davies. This will be investigated at the highest levels. by us. The investigation was swift and decisive, while the military medics tended to Art, ensuring he was stable and comfortable and discreetly removing the handcuffs. Colonel Thorne had a very brief, very pointed conversation with the police captain and a now-arrived extremely agitated city mayor, who had been roused from his bed by a frantic call from the Pentagon. Officer Davies was immediately suspended, his badge and weapon confiscated by his own department under the watchful eyes of the Marines. Officer Miller provided a full, detailed statement corroborating Art's account and Davies's excessive force. The official police report was significantly amended. Art Pendleton, after being cleared by the medics, was not taken to a local hospital or a police station. He was respectfully escorted by Colonel Thorne into the command Humvee. "Sergeant Major," the colonel said, his voice filled with sincere apology and respect, "Rosie's still serving breakfast. It would be my honor if you'd allow me and my men to join you and your veteran friends. Our treat, of course. And then we need to have a serious discussion with the VA and some other agencies about getting you into proper housing and ensuring your service is appropriately recognized and supported. This ends today." Art, still a little dazed but his old Marine spirit rekindling, looked at the colonel, then at the tank still dominating the alley, then at the young, humbled Officer Davies, being read his rights by a grim-faced police internal. "Affairs, Sergeant?" A slow smile spread across his weathered face. "Colonel," he said, his voice regaining some of its old strength, "I believe I could manage a cup of Rosie's coffee right about now, and perhaps one of those donuts." The Marine tank didn't actually join them for breakfast, but its presence and the story of its arrival echoed through the city for weeks. Rosie's Diner became a local landmark. Officer Davies faced a federal civil rights investigation, and the end of his law enforcement career, Art Pendleton, with the direct intervention of Colonel Thorne and the full weight of a grateful and now fully alerted military network behind him, was swiftly moved into comfortable, assisted living for veterans. His benefits were reviewed and significantly upgraded. His quiet mornings were no longer spent on a cold bench behind a diner, but in a warm room with good coffee and the respect he had always deserved, because sometimes even for the most forgotten heroes, when a line is crossed, the response isn't just a complaint form. It's the unmistakable, earth-shaking arrival of the United States Marine Corps, reminding everyone that their motto, Semper Fidelis, isn't just a slogan, it's a lifetime guarantee. Subscribe to Hidden Sparks if you believe our heroes deserve unwavering loyalty, and that sometimes a show of force is the only language an injustice understands.